Sparks from Rista and the Flannel Ronin's blades met in the sky 1 minute before the sun rose. They decided an early morning sparring session would best prepare them for the battle ahead. The Rangers granted Gumbel all of the confiscated items from his truck. He chose Lumberjack's axe to start the day, slicing down trees in one swing. The wind picked up as the sky rumbled and the ground howled, announcing the arrival of the forces from the west. The Flannel Ronin ran as swiftly as he could to the Rangers' outpost. "Start the evacuation." The hazy-eyed ranger behind the desk snapped into motion, ringing the alarm. Soon, every citizen of Haven City was awake and headed for the eastern quarter. In the Winnebago, the ground shaking woke Sig, who quickly secured the VHS tape of the film in its platinum briefcase, remembering the words of the Flannel Ronin after last night's screening. "You are not a warrior." "Not by any means. Yet I part with you, the most important role in all of this." He handed Sig the last copy of the tape. "See that you and this film survive these events." Sig stuck to the plan, taking the Winnebago to the far east end of the camp, away from the supposed action. There were only 1,000 Rangers gathered outside the town hall, each lined up in 3 flanks, while Rista, Gumbel, and the Flannel Ronin commanded them. "Fear is pointless. Do not get discouraged. Fight with honor." The Rangers armed their quivers with poison-tipped arrows. Others brandished multi-round hand cannons. The final line unsheathed their machetes and sledgehammers. King Morton arrived in his Neo-Spruce Goose, packed with Dr. Belfry's soldiers. The back-end hatch opened. All 5,000 Franken hunters rained upon the city. A few were struck by arrows from the archers, but kept going. Their armies met in a whirlwind of bloodshed. Machetes cut through the Frankens until a behemoth leading the front line evaded attacks, picking a ranger up by the skull with one hand and crushing it like a water balloon. Other Franken hunters began dodging, grabbing, and tearing apart rangers. The Flannel Ronin turned to Rista. "Take him out." Rista nodded. Using his second sight infrared vision, he pierced through a line of the Kingsmen, running, then leaping into a corkscrew pose with his katana blade extended, tearing through the line of Frankenhunters blocking the behemoth. Rista was face to face with the bulky, 9-foot-tall monstrosity, sporting a machete in each hand. The blind Ronin struck at the beast's chest, but was blocked. Rista deflected, twirling around the behemoth, slicing at the stitches above its knees. The limbs fell off, reducing the monster to 3 feet. Rista forced his blade into the creature's chest, then severed its head in a final blow. He called out to the rangers nearest him. "Aim for the stitches!" King Morton stood in the cockpit of the Neo-Spruce Goose, watching as the Rangers started to overwhelm his Frankenhunters. Sneering, he made the order to the pilot. "Launch Goose 2." The remaining Frankenhunters emerged out of the back of the plane wearing rocket packs and brandishing high-caliber pistols in both hands. They attacked from above, picking off the Rangers one by one. The Flannel Ronin and George perched atop a mountainside. He felt out with his mind, grabbing an air Franken and crashing it into the next, creating a domino effect that took out a whole line. George looked to the Flannel Ronin, who nodded. Their power leapt into the air. Charging forward, they downed another air Franken, then pounced on one after the other to keep airborne. Overseeing the battlefield, King Morton knew he had to contain the Rangers. "Launch the Firefly missiles." The Neo Goose rained down smart missiles from its undercarriage. The missiles flew to their coordinates and exploded, creating a ring of fire around the war. The Crimson Dread armor stood behind the glass plate at the end of the cockpit. The king disrobed, then put on the nth aluminum armor. The Neo-Spruce Goose flew into the center of battle. The king dropped from its belly like a newborn demon, wielding a large mace in one hand, his family sword in the other. "Bring me the Flannel Ronin!" The Flannel Ronin barely made it to the far end of the battlefield before the wall of fire erupted. He used his all-sight to stare down King Morton, approaching from 10 feet away. "Her name was Yamile!" His words were echoes on the wind. "She hid me from you 5 feet away. She told you I was stillborn." They were face to face, staring each other down. "I am your last son. That won't stop me from killing you." "Nor I you." He slid back, taking out his katana in one gesture. "You should be given the honor of knowing that you will be slain by the last of your blood." "While you have been talking, boy, you should know that my armor has been absorbing the rays of the sun." The Crimson Dread armor glowed a radiant yellow, then bright red. King Morton extended his right hand, channeling a fireball that shot out at the Flannel Ronin. He blocked it with his katana, but was still sweaty and burned, as the blade contained the blast. The Flannel Ronin concentrated as much mental will as he could to lift 3 boulders, throwing them at King Morton. He blocked the first 2 with his solar beams, and was pelted by the third. The Flannel Ronin charged head first at King Morton, striking at his armor, his sword lasting the heat, but not making a dent, until the king rebounded, grabbing the Flannel Ronin by his sword arm. "What a silly child you are, attacking me with your stick." He squeezed the Flannel Ronin's arm, burning through his flesh. The pain was unbearable, but in the Ronin's mind he heard a furious roar. George leapt at King Morton's back, digging his fangs into the armor, tearing it off, along with his powerful teeth. The king was powerless. The Flannel Ronin acted quickly, and through his pain, stabbed King Morton through his throat at the back of his neck. Blood splattered as soon as the blade exited flesh. The Flannel Ronin dropped to his knees, next to his best friend. "George, can you hear me?" "Yes, but fading." The Flannel Ronin could not hold back his tears. Images in his mind went from the frail kitten he rescued to this beaten, bloodied, and burned gargantuan in front of him. Blood flowed from George's mouth. His midsection was intensely burned, his front paws skinned, with bone and muscle showing. "Are you okay?" "Yes, but it doesn't matter." "Matters to me. Keep fighting." George! For the first time since they met, he did not hear him. Embracing the giant cat, the Flannel Ronin expected to mourn for a moment, but he could still feel strong lungs breathing, and hear the slow pace of his heart. He might not be able to hear George, but he was still alive. Before he could think of what to do, the pilot of the King's Neo-Spruce Goose spoke over a megaphone. "The king may be dead, but under royal orders you were all sentenced to death before his passing. Under his last decree, we will be dropping a megaton payload to demolish Haven City. And 1, 2... What the? An enormous ball of garbage flew out of the sky, directly into the Neo-Spruce Goose. The plane immediately exploded. Moments later, the entire island of New York City emerged from the clouds. Brooklyn watched from the top of the Empire State Building, commanding her students with her mind.
"Windmakers, focus on the wall of fire."
The 3 windmakers, Noel, Ika, and Orrin, flew into the air, down to the ring of fire. Using their minds, they summoned winds that created a funnel to smother the flames. Clouds of steam were now in their place. Brooklyn left with Samantha and Arturo in a pod helicopter with double rotators on its sides. Flying over the chaos, neither the air or ground Frankenhunters had eased up. The Rangers retreating through the wall of smoke were getting picked off. Rista led the Rangers while defending attacks. He was confronted by 4 Frankenhunters. Rista held his sword, curved with his right hand, giving a 2-fingered taunt with his left. The 4 closed in on him. He parried to his right, slicing upward, cutting down 2 Frankenhunters. Sliding into a swift half circle, the blind Ronin was in between his remaining combatants. The one directly in front of him went to grab him. Rista ducked, taking 4 limbs before severing their heads. Feeling the ground shake below his feet, he turned, witnessing through his infrared vision a horde of ground and air Frankenhunters charging at him. Rista extended his sword, ready to go down fighting. The podcopter flew in back of the horde, facing its blades, then gliding low to the ground, shredding through the army of the undead. The podcopter then flew above Rista. Samantha jumped through its bottom hatch, landing in front of her father. They bowed to each other.
Where is your mother?
Biting her lower lip in solemn anger, she swayed her head from left to right. Rista sighed, then raised his sword. Looking at Samantha, who nodded towards the remaining horde, she unleashed her own katana, and the 2 ran off. He went low, she went high. The Flannel Ronin moved George to the side of the battlefield, covering him with a blanket, then found Gumbel. The 2 also made it their mission to protect the fleeing Rangers, but most of the threat moved to the horde. They took down the last remaining Frankenhunters in their sector. Gumbel rested his back against a stack of bodies. The Flannel Ronin stood with his eyes closed, 2 fingers against his right temple. Are you taking a nap?
I'm bringing her here.
Her who? The wind picked up, announcing the arrival of the podcopter. The hatch opened above the Flannel Ronin, who used his abilities to leap inside. Brooklyn was in front of him, looking better than she did in their minds. They wasted no time, coming together in an embrace and passionate kiss to rival any that came before. After the smoke cleared, the last of the Kingsmen were killed. The Rangers and citizens of Haven City were safe to sift through the remains of their scorched hamlet. Brooklyn took the Flannel Ronin, Gumbel, Rista, and George to New York City. George was taken to Shauna the Healer and the albino triplets, an ex-royal doctor, and 3 of Brooklyn's students who went by A, B, and Z. The triplets and the doctor dressed George's wounds and used their healing abilities, as well as mechakinesis, to craft new platinum saber teeth, a lower jaw, and chest plate of steel, as well as 2 mechanical front paws with razor-sharp claws. His life signs improved, but he still had to be sedated and hooked into a life support system until he fully recuperated. The Flannel Ronin's burns were taken care of. He was offered a new hand, but declined. That night, the Flannel Ronin went into the mind world, but instead of trying to communicate with Brooklyn, he was searching for George. He did not feel or see him for hours, and had given up hope when he arrived. Looking as he did before the battle, George yawned.
Where are we? I call it the mind world. It's pretty.
The cherry blossoms blew in front of an orange sunset. George was not wrong.
We dead?
No, but you're going to have to sleep for a while.
Fine with me.
George curled up next to the Flannel Ronin, who put his arm around him, and for the first time in a long time, he smiled. An alarm went off, jarring the Flannel Ronin awake. Brooklyn was by his side. The 2 went to the meeting hall, where Polar Vortex was grabbing any Neo-Samurai she could find and draining their essence. Rista and Samantha did their best to cut away at the creature. Rista went for her knees when she grabbed him by the skull, picked him up, then threw him across the room. The Flannel Ronin attempted to use his mind to control Polar Vortex, but his thoughts were blasted with an unbearable screeching. Brooklyn hurled objects at the demon, but it was too fast. She eventually made it to Brooklyn and squeezed her neck.
Now where were we?
Gumbel crashed through the glass front doors of the meeting hall with a crazed glare in his eye. Your Highness! Polar Vortex dropped Brooklyn. The demon was now more interested in this fool with his bravado. She pounced at him, ready to drain his soul. Gumbel opened his mouth, sucking Polar Vortex inside of him. Inside Gumbel, Polar Vortex was face to face with a pitch-black, oily version of herself.
What are you?
I am the true rage inside this man. I have been with him since he saw his father beheaded. And after all these years, I only grow stronger by the moment.
You seek to destroy me?
Indeed.
In the meeting hall, the Flannel Ronin helped Brooklyn to her feet. Samantha did the same for Rista, as all four of them watched the insanity that was Gumble levitating 3 feet in the air, vibrating, turning bright red with his mouth agape. He slammed to the ground, hunching over as Polar Vortex tore herself from his mouth. She was terrified, in tears. She shoved both the Flannel Ronin and Brooklyn aside, running through the broken glass doors.
That thing in there is the ultimate evil. I barely made it out with my life.
Her outrage was cut off by a digital growl in the back of her. Polar Vortex twisted around slowly, face to face with George, who pounced on her, tearing her apart with his new fangs. Fighting the creature drained the demon of her immortality. She bled black blood for the first and last time in her life.
Tastes bad.
She is wrong. The group turned to Gumble, who was now vibrant red with white eyes. Being the ultimate evil would require an amount of work that I am not committed to. I only want one thing. They made it back to the west. Gumble went to the vault, gathered all of his father's films, and all of Finch Damone's music, then walked into the sunset. Brooklyn and the Flannel Ronin united the East and the West into one kingdom, and they all lived. You just listened to The Flannel Ronin, Episode 7, The Battle of Haven City. This audio drama was written, performed, recorded, and edited by Drew Manning. If you liked what you heard, please stay tuned to this channel. While the Flannel Ronin story may be over, coming up next, we have Werewolves on the Moon. Thank you for your time, and have a great one. The Winnebago drove erratically through the battlefield, avoiding all of the dead bodies. It had been 4 hours since the floating city appeared. Sig could not find anyone. A red biplane landed in front of him. He swerved not to hit it. The pilot exited, short with a handlebar mustache. Sig rolled down his window. Bonjour! Are you Monsieur Bushy, the director with the film? Huh!